Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you for joining us for Fueling Real Business Decisions with Social Insights. Our webinar should take about 45 minutes today with some time for Q&A at the end. And so I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we have Kim Bozich from Masco. She is an e-business manager who is in charge of the social insights there at Masco. And we also have Bas van Urk from Oxime, who is our managing director here at Metrics Lab, managing our social media insights solutions. So thank you very much for joining again, and we will now start our webinar. Bas?
All right, thank you very much, April. I will kick off this session with explaining what we mean with social insights, why it is relevant for marketing research, and how we do it at Metrics Lab. After that, I will pass over to Kim for the really exciting stuff. So hold on for that. If we go to the next slide, so with social insights, we really mean insights that are derived from user-generated content. And with user-generated content, we basically mean any type of content that is produced and put out there on the digital channels by unpaid contributors. So we can refer here to anything from an image or picture uploaded to Instagram, a blog post written, a tweet, a like, a share, a video uploaded to YouTube, or even a review left at a website like Amazon. So what we see these days is that we all leave these type of digital breadcrumbs, which gives us a really big pile of social data. But now the question is for today, I think very relevant, is why is this type of data important and relevant for marketing research? And for that, I will turn to Eric Qualman, writer of Socialnomics, and like himself and many others have done research on this. And one of the things he found out is that actually 1 in 3 bloggers will post their opinions online about your products and brands, if you like it or not. But I think even more staggering these days is that the research done by Nielsen, which claims that 92% of consumers these days have more trust in user-generated content than in traditional advertising. So this is why this type of social data, which is all around us, is very relevant for marketing and marketing research. And I think if you look at the rise of the new generation, the so-called millennials, who've grown up in a world which is purely digital, I think we cannot longer ignore this type of data as a very important part of the marketing research we're doing today. Especially since millennials, you know, I've said in research that 86% of them actually see user-generated content as a strong indicator of the quality of a product or service. And this is really where it ties into buying intent, right? And this is where it becomes a very integral part of any marketing decision we should take today. So if we move over to the next slide, we've now talked about what is social insights, why it is relevant. I think also if we look at the way we can gather, you know, insights from the social data, we've seen an evolution over the last decade. So when we look back around 10, 12 years ago, we saw the rise of different social media channels, and we saw them becoming more important in business life. We also saw the first generation of social listening tools. These tools were actually quite simple. You put in a keyword and, you know, just meant for listening and very limited in actionability, basically backward looking. And it was more based from the traditional media monitoring industry than anything else. We've seen now development from these type of tools to actually what we now would call social analytics tools. And these are pretty strong software-based tools which can gather social data in a dynamic way, real time, and in large amounts. And typical providers of these type of solutions we see out there today are Radian6, the Sprinklers, Brandwatch, Synthesio, and they've developed a software tool which focuses on the basics. And with the basics, I mean basically who, what, and where. And as said, they're very strong in real time and dynamic, but there's also some limitations to using this software tool. And this comes especially in the depth that is allowed with this type of software-based tooling. That makes it less actionable for marketing research, and also not as predictive in nature as social insights, where we talk about today. So these type of tools have a very strong market fit, so to say, a product market fit with, for example, service departments, because they nowadays do their customer service more and more through social media channels. So this is the example where I've got a question as a consumer to a company. I ask that over a social media channel, and I get, even within seconds, a response. So these tools help with this because they are real-time, dynamic, and they can also capture large amounts, right? So I want to know, how am I doing versus a competitor? Am I providing better customer service? These tools help a lot with that. Also, these tools are good if you want to have a high-level overview quickly over multiple channels. These tools work very well. So they're often used by and bought by communications departments, but also PR departments and digital departments. But as said, because it's purely software-based, there's definitely limitations to these tools. And that's where we come to the third generation of so-called social listening tools. And this is where we really reside with Metrics Lab. And we call this social insights. And in social insights, we not only use, those further developed social analytics tools, but we combine this with the human touch, as we like to call it. And this combination of human supervised data cleaning, classification, and enrichments allows us to work with really high quality data. So we guarantee a data relevancy in our research of at least 95%. On top of that, because we use this human supervised data enrichment, we can go a level deeper. So we use that human analysis to uncover those deeper insights. And we do that by adding context to the contributions in the form of labels. But we also split down the contributions in smaller parts of data where we label these smaller parts, and are also able in that way to determine sentiment in a very sensitive way. And this way, because we go 2 levels deeper, because we only work based on clean data, we actually have a very strong fit with marketing and marketing research departments. And these type of departments are usually making use of these type of solutions. So if we go to the next slide, we can actually see how we do it from a practical point of view with Metrics Lab. So how do we deliver those social insights? It always starts with a research concept and strategy. We are researchers by nature, it's in our DNA, that's always where we start. So we will look, what is the research concept and strategy? Based on that, we make our search strategy, and then we use that machine-based data gathering and analytics to get in all the data. Then we use that human touch, right? The human supervised way of data cleaning, classification, and enrichment to go that level deeper. Based on this clean and enriched statements, we've got our own systems and algorithms here, which our experienced research managers use to get to actionable insights and consultancy. So it's not only a dashboard you get with us, but actually a report, and we work very close together with the clients. And this is where we close the loop, right? We start in a very consultative way, and we always deliver in a very consultative way. So if we then move on more to the solution we're talking on today, we focus today a lot on how social insights can actually fuel decisions on brand and campaign performance. What we see among our clients these days is that the marketing spend in the digital space has really exploded over the last couple of years. And a question typically our clients have is, all right, I now spend so much of my marketing budget online, but now I need to also be able to measure what is my return on investment in the digital world. How am I performing online? How do I do compared to competitors? What are areas I can improve on? And typically those questions and more, we try to answer with our brand fame solution. If we go to the next slide. So brand fame is a solution that's really developed to answer these type of questions, but you will learn later on from Kim. There is a lot of additional benefits coming from running this program. But just to go over the basics, brand fame is a solution that helps to understand your own performance, but also understand the underlying drivers. Because we go that level deeper, we're also able to explore the drivers behind your performance. Here you should think about brand associations, product attributes, campaigning you've done, but also customer service and competition. This solution is unique because it results in a one single number, which is comparable against competition and over time, and it allows to take those deep dives on the drivers behind the score. And it's all based on this clean and enriched data, as what I said before. So if we move on, then you will see the brand fame score, how it's built up. Interesting fact to mention is that Masco was really adopted this program and integrated in different layers of the organization. Kim will speak about this. Actually has embraced this so much that they changed the name to Net Reputation Score internally. So brand fame and Net Reputation Score are actually the same. So, but Kim will elaborate later on that. So how is this score built up? Well, the fundamentals behind this score are all online contributions are important. However, some contributions are more important than others, and sentiment always matters. And based on these three pillars, we come to the score, and then we also look at the underlying drivers, of course. So if you look at volume, next slide. So as explained, we collect all user-generated content out there, including ratings and reviews, for example. Then we clean that data, and based on that clean data, we're actually able to determine the true volume of the conversations or the contributions that are happening around your brand. So we measure that true volume, and we make sure that is clean. And we look at the volume, so how much talk is there, but also where is this talk happening. Then we move to the next slide, and then we look at sentiment. So this is where we take that next step of coding, and you see this code list example down there. So this is what partly is done by artificial intelligence, partly is done or is supervised by a human analyst to make sure we find out the right sentiment and we label that extra data. And typically what we're looking here for is what are people really talking about? So not only taking that high level, but also taking a step deeper is, all right, is this comment they're making, is this related to brand or is this related to customer service? And then really trying to find out that underlying tone of voice. So in this step, we really make sure that we get the right context about the data we're talking about. And then the third step, influence. As said, not everyone is equally important online. So this depends a lot on how influential are you as a person. So we're looking at who is saying or who is contributing in this case, and how influential are they. And for this, we've got our in-house developed algorithm, which is scientifically proven, where we actually determine the influence of a contributor, but also the influence of a channel and how many other people are reached. So these are really the fundamentals of this score. And what we'll do now is we'll go over to the next slide. And I've given you a little bit of the background behind NRS, brand fame. Now we move over to the exciting stuff, the real life stuff, where Kim will explain a little bit more about how Masco has adopted the NRS program and what type of benefits they get from this. There you go, Kim. Thank you.
Thanks, Boz. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Nice to be speaking with you today. Again, my name is Kim Bozich, and I'm the e-business manager at Masco Corporation. So, April, can you go to the next slide, please? It's pretty funny if you saw the title. Many of you probably said, "Who's Masco?" And I get that a lot as I normally introduce myself. Very commonly, I say, "Oh, I work at Masco Corporation." I get a lot of puzzling looks, and then I have to follow it up with, oh, well, we own Delta Faucet and Behr Paint. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I know that company. I know those brands. So many of you probably have some of our brands in your kitchen and your bathrooms, but that's how I like to introduce ourselves. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just a little bit about Masco Corporation. We are the global leader in the design and manufacture and distribution of branded home improvement and building products. So we're about a $7.5 billion enterprise. We're operating out of 4 distinct product categories. And you can tell by the categories we focus primarily on consumer goods related to DIY and home improvement. What you can also imagine is we rely very heavily on a retailer network and our dealer networks. And we only sell very minimally direct to consumer, and that's going to be primarily for repair parts as well as like paint samples and those types of things. So while we don't own the purchase portion of the consumer journey, we do control our brand. We control the health, we control the perspective and perceptions that consumers have about our brands. And we also focus very heavily on thought leadership and consumer support. Another key point to be aware of about Masco Corporation is we're a decentralized enterprise. What that means is each brand or business unit is essentially its own entity. So they have very different business models, they have very different products, product lines, they have different reporting KPIs, they even have different presidents in executive leadership teams. So Masco Corporation is essentially a holding company, but we do still try to leverage our size and come up with shared best practices, best learnings, and those types of things. Can you go to the next slide, please? So let me talk a little bit about the program itself. So we started way back in 2012, and it's only 5 years ago, but to me, I started in 2012. It seems like an eternity. We have 9 of our key brands in scope in our competitive sets. We do a 12-month rolling model, and we update the score for each of our brands quarterly. And then I think Boz already mentioned this, but I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing the point appropriately, that we do have a dedicated Metrics Lab team. And while they're not a replacement in any capacity to our brand agencies, they are positioned very strictly as a partner. And it really is a partnership that we have between me and Oxheim and Metrics Labs, as well as each of our brands. And very oftentimes they partner with the brand agencies as well, especially when very interesting insights are derived from some of the report outs. So we all work very closely, and it's a very, very strong network that we've built over the years. Next slide, please. So Boz showed a slide like this earlier, and I think it's important for those people on the phone to just kind of make sure that we're looking at the landscape from a brand perspective of what things used to be like when we first brought in this program in 2012. Pete talked about like the traditional and social listening, and we all had Radian 6s back in the day, and as brand marketers, it was awesome to have those types of tools, but what it did do was create some real gaps for us. So yes, it did a real great kind of capturing and aggregating data on domains that we wanted to follow or tags that we wanted to follow about our brands and about our competitors. But any efficiencies that we would have seen from this type of listening program was lost very quickly with the noise. And Boz mentioned that earlier. So we did have to do kind of our own cleansing and scrubbing, which is really tough and a heavy resource drain on our teams. In addition, these tools were not in the day really good at detecting tone or sarcasm, or if somebody said that your faucet was badass, that was instantly categorized as a very negative connotation, when as a brand marketer, that is literally gold, that you found somebody so passionate that they wanted to shout from the rooftops on their social platforms that your product was badass. So there were definitely gaps there. In addition, back then we were hearing from Gary Vee that we had to start not talking about specifically what our brands wanted to talk about, but we had to listen to our consumers and talk about what they wanted to talk about. So we were kind of flipping the industry on its ear and saying, okay, you need to shift as a brand, you need to shift how you're doing things. We weren't really sure how to do that, and we weren't really sure how to get the right data. So this tool definitely has enabled us to start looking at things differently. And when we think about the agency insights, I believe on Boz's slide it was really about social insights. But back in the day, that didn't exist. In 2012, we were still relying on our agencies to tell us how good our brands were doing. And not to bash agencies because they are so beneficial for all of us, but there's sort of a bias there, right? Because if you're doing well, then they're doing well, and they get to keep their seat at the table. And nobody really, an agency is not going to tell you your baby's ugly, so they're trying to put a positive spin on it. Well, that's great, and it's really good for patting yourself on the back as a brand, but that doesn't really remove the bias that you need to make sure that you're making really appropriate, really relevant business decisions. They're going to benefit the consumer. So it kind of was a way for us to kind of call ourselves out on the carpet, and because this was a third party and this new partnership with Metrics Labs, trust us, they don't care if they're calling our baby ugly. I mean, a duck is a duck. And I think that's really, really valuable, and the brands are starting to, not starting to, but over the years, they've really internalized it and benefited it. So can we go to the next slide, please? So real quickly, I know Boz talked a little bit earlier about the methodologies and the data set at a high level, but just so that the data folks on the phone are able to really have the appropriate lens of what the data set is that we're using, it's pulling in all those relevant domains. So it's pulling in wherever we have user-generated content, so UGC or CGC, wherever our branded content is, our competitors, our product categories, it's pulling all of that in, ranking that domain with an importance score, and then we pull in the content and the user-generated content. We scrub that, classify it, positive, negative, neutral, tag it, is it a consumer solutions issue, is it an MPD issue, and then we break that statement down. For instance, if somebody said in a Facebook post, I absolutely love my craft-made kitchen, but the delivery was real problematic, we would break that post down into individual statements, and then each of those statements would be classified. So there's thousands of pieces of data that we're getting quarterly, and because there's so much data and it's so relevant and rich, we're able to really drill down into some of those dashboards that you're seeing there on the right. So we have very robust dashboards. We're able to pick up on trends very, very quickly because we're breaking things down so in such a minute manner. So let's talk a little bit about why it is successful at Masco. So if you could go to the next slide, April. So it's pretty apparent pretty early on that if we devoted a little bit of time and resources to support this program, we'd really realize some big wins. And I was very proud of our enterprise for grasping onto this concept so early, because it was just kind of bubbling up as to how you should really be treating UGC and CGC back 5 years ago. But for whatever reason, our executives at Masco, it really, really resonated. So we did decide to internalize this. So as it's matured, we've completely internalized the score so that this is the only metric for which Masco is monitoring our brand health. So our brands are all monitoring themselves in addition, however they need to be monitoring themselves, but this is the only score that Masco executives are paying attention to. So, Masco executives are very happy with it. I want to talk about that shortly. But in addition, it's had an amazing impact outside of just the numbers from a brand perspective. So Boz talked a lot about the insights that we've been getting and how maybe we've organizationally changed some things, and I'll talk through those as well. So let's look at from a Masco perspective. If you hit next, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we are a very decentralized organization. So when our group presidents go out to visit the individual BUs to talk about annual strategies or why they're winning in a product category, every brand's going to have their own story, their own plan of attack, and they should because they are their own entity. But when it came down to digital, everybody was literally highlighting different components. Some brands were focusing on likes, some brands were focusing on number of followers. Nobody could really tell what the value of a like was. So it was very disparate and very confusing, and it was very difficult to monitor, well, how are we doing? So once this score came to be, it really did normalize a KPI for which we were going to be measured. And because the goal of this program is to be talked about in the most relevant places for brands and product categories, in the most large amounts, and very positively compared to our competitive sets, we knew every single brand needed to be doing that regardless of product category. It allowed us to avoid the conversations or excuses such as, well, we're a small brand, we're not like the Bears or the Deltas, you can't compare us. Well, actually we can, because everybody wants to have the highest score based on the relevancy of the product category. So it was very, very helpful for us to now have a single way to gauge our brand success with this metric. And never was there ever before a mention of how we stacked up against competition other than estimated market share. So now what we did have was tangible user-generated content that told us exactly what the consumers are saying and how we stacked up against our competitive sets. And we could break it down even further and say, well, we're winning here, but you know, brand X is doing this really well. So it really did put us on the pulse of how we were doing from a product category standpoint. And the last thing I would just say is I don't know in the beginning that our BUs necessarily appreciated that Masco executives had latched onto this score back in the day, but it did provide the appropriate amount of tension between brand and HQ, because we would never say, because we're a hands-off organization, we'd never say you need to be doing this, but it did give our executives the appropriate amount of data to ask poignant questions. So we would never say, what are you going to do to fix this? We would say, we noticed that there's a trend here, what is your strategy? We would never say you need to fix this, but we would ask maybe, how are you planning on fixing this? And it really did open up the dialogue, and it level-setted the conversation around digital, which was very, very mucky before. So now we're all using the same language, we're all measuring the same thing from us, and it's really kind of helped us from a communication standpoint. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk about how we've been winning from a brand perspective. It's funny because I was in those early on presentations back in the day, and we had literally, it would be the social intern that was that young person, the young whippersnapper that we put on the account to watch our Facebook page because no one really knew what to do with social and digital back then. So we would have these extraordinarily robust presentations and report outs and insights, and we'd be presenting to the one intern. And then we would try to arm them with, okay, well, how do we build your case so that we can get more people in the room? But eventually that started happening, and as we matured and as our messages were crafted very poignantly with these very intricate insights that we could make real decisions based on, more and more people started listening to us. So because we could tell service, for instance, that there was a large audience on a certain forum that needed some attention, or because we could back up their claim that logistics department had a major flaw in delivery of products, and it's out there for the world to view, people really did start paying attention. And then we would have the practitioners or sort of the analysts for each of these teams, such as MPD or Consumer Solutions. But now what we have is the leadership teams. Actually, the leadership for each of those departments at the table. And it is a really, really great conversation now. And instead of, it would also be, they would hear that, hear our quarterly report out and then kind of walk away and wait till the next quarterly report out. They're starting to build these cross-departmental teams and sort of action teams to either say, well, this worked out really well, how do we do this better? What else can we capitalize on? Or, yeah, this does look like a problem, and how do all of these teams work together to help each other out? So it did break down quite a bit of silos, and because of that, it's also resulted in a much more cohesive conversation around the brand in all of its constituencies. So in addition to how the brands are operating, the quality of the data and that methodology for which it's gleaned is so compelling for us. So this is the first platform we'd seen that actually weighs the value of the data so differently. Meaning that not all posts are going to be created equally, not all domains are created equally, not all consumers that are generating those posts are even created equal. It does two things. So first, because as you guys know, the internet's huge, data is abundant, but aside from the overall trends and themes we glean, we're able to articulate where we should be spending our resources. So based upon importance rankings or influence values or frankly, a huge amount of negative sentiment that we need to address, we're able to make real specific recommendations to our brand teams on how they could be allocating budget and where they should be putting resources, both human capital and fiscal capital, to be the most impactful. And then when we live in a world where everyone's trying to do everything and everybody has to be on all of these social platforms, this is really, really helpful to provide focus and make sure that we're spending our time the way we should be spending it. So secondly, what it's really helped us do is we've heard a lot about Google talking about these micro moments and how we need to be where the consumer is at the exact time they want us to be there with that exact piece of content that they're looking for. Because we have this data, we're able to map out our consumer journeys really, really strongly and in depth and make sure that we are doing that and that we are changing our content strategies to support that in the best possible manner, and we're seeing some really big wins there. So where we used to look at just ratings and reviews and it was a SKU-based star rating, you know, we would look at choose and see if there was an issue, or we'd look at the Facebook page and just kind of take the pulse. We're actually breathing life and creating maybe a fourth dimension into that consumer journey, because this content is just, it's literally screaming a story at you for how you can help and do better. So let's go to the next slide, please. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about from a brand perspective is just highlighting a little bit differently how some of our smaller brands have seen some retail partner benefit. Here's where it is really gripping, and it's really intriguing, but most of us have line reviews, and as I mentioned earlier, we're very tied to our retailer networks. And when that's the case, we have these meetings, and most of the time it's very centered around price or centered around SKU and offering. And I am not saying that they're not centered around price still. I think that a lot of our meetings with our retailers are price isn't going away, so that's always going to be a topic. But when we're able to bring some of this data and let them know that, yeah, we are looking at that, we are looking at this data so in depth, and here's what they're saying about us, here's what they're saying about our competitors, here's how we're winning, here's what they're saying about you, it's really interesting to see their ears perk up and to kind of shift the conversation away from being very product driven and more from a thought leadership perspective. So we're able to say, here's what you guys should be listening to, here's what we're hearing, because they're not listening to this at this depth. We're showing a little bit more thought leadership, and it's fostering more of a partnership relationship and partnership conversation, as opposed to strictly, we're selling your product, how do we get more product on your shelves? So it is establishing us as a thought leader, and I would say, you know, this isn't for all of our brands because these are all big oiled machines, and our retailer networks are very big, well-oiled machines, and everybody's trying to get to the same thing. But I will say we are starting to see some benefits in just having this type of data and using that to turn the conversation a little bit from strictly line review, as I said earlier, to more of a, we all want the same thing. We all want to be the best partner, the best brand, the best product for the consumer, and make sure that the consumer's happy, because we're very consumer-centric now. So everybody's kind of monitoring it, but when we're able to bring in and say, here's how we're monitoring it and how often, it's really, really been helpful in these types of conversations. So I could obviously talk about this stuff all day long. I love what this program has done for us. I've loved how it's matured over the past 5 years. But I want to make sure that we have some time for questions. So April? And Boz, was there anything else that you wanted to mention and wrap up?
Thank you, Kim. Well, I wanted just to say thank you very much for contributing to this. I think it's very insightful what you shared, and I'm really happy and proud of this this partnership that we've going on for the last 5 years already. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I will move over to April to go over some questions and answers.
All right, well, thank you, Boss and Kim. And we do have a few moments for questions and have had a couple come in. So I would encourage the audience to use the question feature that is in your webinar pane to answer or to ask additional questions. One of the ones that's come in is, as you've mentioned, Kim, that you have matured this program over time. And are there any things that you saw happening over the course of the last 5 years that you might have done differently, or some things that you found were particularly surprising?
Oops, yeah, I would say what I found a little bit surprising, surprising I think is a tough word, but I think it took us a very long time for us to internalize this, because I think at a base level, we all can appreciate that, yes, we need to be doing, UGC is relevant. But it's difficult to really take those insights that are sometimes very difficult to digest and internalize those. So that's the thing I think is, we had to talk a lot about methodology and had a lot of discussions around agencies around methodology, just proving out that why this is a little bit different and why it's valid and why it's very poignant and why it's also, I would say, we did a lot of work on making sure that agencies were comfortable with this data set, because, and saying, you know, we're not trying to get you out. There is a place for everyone at the table. So that, I think, took a little longer than I thought it would. So I don't know that anything would, I would have done anything differently. It was just, you know, you need to make sure that everybody has their head around what this score is. So we spent a lot more time on methodology than we did on insights, you know, the first couple of years.
Okay. We have another question regarding if you do traditional brand tracking and NPS measurement, how do these two align?
Yeah, April, I think I can take that question. So traditional brand tracking, this is where you take over time, typically through a survey, where you take those dips and you look what people say about your brand. With NPS, you really go out and ask people, what do you know, would you recommend this brand, product, or service to friends? And so I think those go well together, and that's what we see in the research space anyway. But what we've tried to do with this brand fame solution is actually to come up with a solution that explains NPS quicker, or is a quicker indicator for your NPS score than the traditional brand tracker. And because our social data is basically on all the time, our brand fame program is on all the time, we're actually very quickly in picking up certain trends. And because of the methodology used, because the deeper insight, our outcomes and the brand fame score can actually be predictive in nature as well. So I hope that is kind of the answer to the question asked here.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Boss. We also have a question on the sentiment, being able to determine what are the actual relevant comments and how that can be, make sure I'm reading this right, to make sure that they understand how you determine the sentiment and which comments are the most relevant among multiple languages.
Yes, so April, I can probably take this one as well. So sentiment is really important, and as I've said, we are constantly looking at software-based solution to do this as well. And I think we see developments right now with artificial intelligence, but it is probably one of the biggest challenges still out there with software-based tools to get that right sentiment out. And the way we work with this is, as Kim explained, is when we get in, if we look at a contribution, we split out the contribution in smaller data parts, and then we actually we use, first of all, we call this topic modeling and machine learning to determine the relevancy by software. And then we go over those statements, the smaller pieces of data, with actually a human analyst. And this person will determine through labeling if the sentiment is correct. And we actually use, this goes from very negative to very positive and everything in between. So we've got always an extra security of that human touch in this. And then the second part of the question, I think, relates to differences in languages. So we've trained up our machine learning in different languages, but we also employ over 500 analysts all over the world who rate in their local language. So that is really important. As you can hear, I'm not native English. So for me to go rate American contribution with maybe also slang, I would probably miss out stuff. So for the American contributions, we always use American analysts to actually get to that level deeper of sarcasm and slang to really filter that out. So that is how we actually take both parts of the coin, actually make sure that we have got them covered by machine learning, artificial intelligence, but definitely by local humans involved.
Yeah, and as a brand, I'd like to just capitalize on that or build on that a little bit, Boss, because I think what's also very nice to have is this program is how approachable and how attainable the conversations we're able to have with the actual analysts as a brand. So in the beginning, when you're setting things up, when we're setting up our tag trees and we're setting up our language and like keywords, and you know, there's a nomenclature that goes associated with each different product category. We train those analysts on that. So by the end of it, it's really interesting that these analysts that are listening for it, they're basically a brand person because they know all of these things. So it's, and we've had those same people throughout the years. So there's a level of training that goes into it, but it's really nice because we're able to get to those people that are watching all of those comments also. And if we see something that needs to be tweaked, it's a very quick pivot.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. We have one final question in our last couple minutes, and this is in regards to, you shared, Kim, how you get the reports for each brand, and the question is about any methodologies or best practices for sharing learnings across the brands. Is that something that you're able to take advantage of?
Yeah, we have seen that because we are word of mouth is essentially the holy grail that all brands are trying to get to. We are able to share some best practices, or if somebody's struggling with volume or sentiment on issues, another brand might be doing really well. Our brands, I think, over the next couple years are going to start talking more regularly and across brands about that, but right now we've been sort of the centralized office and the conduit and making sure that best practices are sprinkled into the presentations. But I think now that we're kind of a humming machine now, and this is very internalized across the enterprise, we'll start bringing those communities together to have more organic conversation and insights and plans of attack. So yeah, we will. We're definitely heading in that direction to make that more the way we do business with NRS.
Excellent. Well, those are all the questions that we have, and so thank you everyone who joined us today, and we hope that you found this informative, and if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us at metrixlab.com. Thank you very much, Kim and Bas, and we hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.